Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Shields. This is Next in Media. My guest this week is Ross Benish. He's a senior analyst at eMarketer. Hey, Ross. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Mike.
I'm glad to catch you. As we will get into, you are in the middle of a very wide-ranging book tour, which is exciting. So I'm glad to be part of that. But I want to start getting into what you cover day to day. You know you've been writing a lot about the streaming ad market over the last couple of years. It's taken off like crazy, as we will talk about. It's interesting to look at some of your posts towards the end of last year. You know, where you're talking about streaming and CTV advertising specifically blowing up, but yet linear is still hanging in very strongly when you look at it through an ad viewing time lens. So can you maybe just set the stage and sort out that seeming contradiction, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure thing. There's a few ways to look at how fast has streaming grown. Like if you just look at time spent, it's damn near 50% of all time spent with television. You know, it's like in the 40s. But if you look at advertising time spent, according to data from ComScore, it's closer to like 15%. It's much, much lower. So despite all the new ad tiers, all the increased in time spent with streaming, linear is the king by far. It's about 6 times the amount of revenue is streaming. And the reasons are pretty simple. It's that even though streaming inventory has increased so much, the ad loads are still way lighter than linear. Yeah. And you have a ton of people, especially on Netflix, who opt out of seeing advertising.
Yeah. And the streaming started out when it was almost totally non-ad supported or primarily non-ad supported. And you're still seeing that lingering effect where there's a huge Netflix audience that has always paid for it without advertising and then on a switch. And you got throw in Prime and Max and things like that. But it is interesting to me that even with Amazon blowing up the marketplace with so much more inventory, it's just going to take a while for the ad avail number to catch up.
Oh yeah, that's going to be the last laggard. Like the first thing that out of the primary metrics of comparing streaming to linear TV, the first one that's going to exceed is time spent. Streaming time spent is going to eclipse linear very soon. And then you have ad spending. That's a few years down the line, probably 2028, let's say somewhere around there.
Right.
But then ad time spent, that's kicking the can down the road. I mean, you probably won't see that till 2030. And Brian Weiser has written about this too, where what's going to happen as you shift from linear viewing to primarily streaming viewing is just overall inventory will shrink.
It's just a smaller bucket, right?
Exactly. So it'll just be a smaller bucket because if I'm watching linear TV for a few hours per day, I'm seeing 15 minutes of ads per hour, no matter what network I'm seeing, really. Right. That there just isn't an equivalent in that in streaming. Like the ad loads are higher on the free services, but people aren't spending hours per day on Tubi. They tend to spend it on Max or Netflix if they have an account with them.
I was going to say what could shift that pretty dramatically would be more and more sports, which is already happening. But you're right. There isn't that, I'm going to watch Roadhouse and on TBS and it's going to take 3 hours because there's so much advertising. And that was so much of cable that isn't being shifted over. That dynamic is not happening in streaming. If it is, that there's a danger that you can actually ruin things. That you're likely not going to see that for a while.
No, not for a while. And I mean, you will still see people I'm going to go watch an old rerun or a syndicated show on Tubi or Pluto, something that's going to be very high ad loads relative to the rest of streaming. But it's not, like you said, you're not going to have Roadhouse turn into a 3-hour movie. You're going to have an hour and a half movie turn into a 2-hour movie instead.
I was happy to sit for Roadhouse was worth a 3-hour wait from much of my life.
I watched Titanic on TNT a bunch of times as a kid, and I was like, your whole
a whole day. Yeah,
that's like 4.5 hours or something like that.
That's funny. All right, I want to come back to some of these points, but when you look at CTV's growth overall, it's interesting because on the one hand, it's like the numbers are great. The market's really strong. It's blowing up. Yeah, you see a lot of the big media companies, they're having a tougher time for their businesses overall, and they're scrambling to grow this business and capture as much of it as they can. So I guess it's a long way of asking, where is the money coming from right now? Is it still mostly old TV money moving over looking for GRPs? Are you still really seeing are we finally seeing the growth come from like all this sophisticated targeting that CTV promises?
Well, most of the money has been those traditional advertisers. I mean, they have when the inventory was scarce, especially, there wasn't a lot to dole out to smaller advertisers who had lower budgets.
Yeah.
And you see that whenever there's like a new big sporting event that's kind of splashy, like when Thursday Night Football launched for Prime Video, but then also Raw on Netflix and the NFL game on Netflix. It's handled like a traditional telecast, and the advertising, it's the same brands that. If you watch the Chiefs on Christmas on Netflix, you saw the same brands.
It looks like that.
It was the same brands you'd see on TBS. I mean, on CBS or Fox. So that's been, in my view, most of streaming ad spending outside of YouTube, like streaming on the subscription services.
Right.
I think that's changing though. So the streaming services, Roku and Disney Plus, and now Comcast, and I think Paramount as well, have introduced products. They've made announcements where they are targeting small and mid-sized advertisers more. So, while it has looked a lot like traditional TV, you're starting to see some more advertisers that you would see on social video, but weren't on linear. You're going to see more performance advertisers, more advertisers with just a smaller budget. Their creative isn't going to have like Beyonce in it or these A-list celebrities. It's going to be a different type of ad.
But there are all of a sudden a lot more tools in the market for helping
there's
to
more
get
tools,
a TV
and there's
commercial
vendors
made.
for sure that are banking on this. There's several different types of vendors that are that are basically building their business on this thing happening. So there is a lot of money behind it to get this momentum going. And then for the streaming services, that means you have a lot more advertisers you could target. There's only so many Fortune companies. Right. If you go after the smaller brands, like you do what Facebook did, but not to that scale.
That is why Facebook and Google have been so. One of the many reasons they're so successful is they have such a vast ad pool, and why wouldn't TV want that? But in the meantime, you're right. There are all these self-service platforms launching, going for that smaller advertiser. Are the big brands? There's so much talk about all the. You can bring your email list and do a clean room match, do all this cool targeting, and then mesh it with your data-driven linear. Like, I don't have a real sense of whether the big traditional TV advertisers are actually doing a whole lot of addressable stuff in television yet. What is your sense?
Well, if it's CTV, I mean, it would have the addressable capability, whether they use it or not. But on the splashiest shows, on those top 10 shows and on sports, I mean, it looks a lot like just a generic ad is placed, and it's the largest brands and they are buying it kind of old school. You probably see more of that targeting really on YouTube. They're the ones who do it the best. Like, I think brands are trying to target on some of these streaming services, but when I watch any of the fast services, I just see the same ads in the same pod, and they're probably targeting me. Like, I'm probably in the market for Geico insurance,
but you're probably
or
not
whatever.
Logged in. They don't profile.
Yeah. Sometimes I may. Who knows? It varies by device if I'm logged in or not, or which account I'm logged into. But God, that gets irritating. It doesn't feel super relevant after 40 minutes. But on YouTube, you really start to see some like things based off my search history. I think is what a lot of it is. Yeah. Like, I get a lot of ads for like little handy tools that I probably watched a tutorial on how to use them because I can't fix anything in my house without watching a YouTube video. So they, I think they're doing all this advanced targeting, and advertisers that work with them are, but it's just more difficult to do that across the board elsewhere.
With regards to YouTube, it's been a big topic the last couple of years, and you mentioned Brian Weezer has written about this recently. He wavers between whether YouTube counts as TV or not, and whether brands are distributing their budgets that way. What have you seen? Are the brands you talk to lumping YouTube in as CTV and buying everything together, evaluating it together, or not necessarily?
I'm aware of this debate. I that perception that they I'm sure there are advertisers who exclude YouTube, so I don't want to say no one does. Because maybe the video isn't viewed as premium, or that experience is viewed as premium. But those who do so are kind of kidding themselves because it's the most consumed video service in the United States. I mean, actually globally, really.
Yeah. Yep.
And such a large part of it is on TV. So I think the share of advertisers who are convinced that YouTube is TV is just continue to grow, but you're going to have holdouts.
Sure. Stepping back a little bit, the last with streaming comes more data, more targeting capabilities. But like we said, there's also been this huge investment in and interest in better metrics, alternative metrics. Between new currencies and just ways to match audiences across platforms. Very complicated. Do you feel like have we reached any kind of consensus in that market? Are brands happy with the streaming metrics that are available to them? Are they really confused?
There's probably more confusion than happiness, and just increasing the amount of available options doesn't solve for a lot of the problems.
Right.
You got to disconnect across systems, a lack of centralized buying, caps not met by the buyer or by the seller. Sellers overpromising the audience they have to reach a certain niche, and the advertiser just, because they want to take it, they don't want to just send money away. So each advancement, each new product is nice in a press cycle, and maybe nice to one up your competitor, because that's a very competitive space with a lot of litigation as well happening. But to appease the advertisers' anxiety, I don't think we're making much progress on that end.
Yeah, you're right. So many of the moves are almost like negotiating through press release versus actually like where the market is going sometimes.
You don't know what you don't know which if you're going to the TV network or the streaming service, it's not always clear which partners they allow and don't allow, and that changes too. Like with the Paramount Nielsen issues. Yeah. So those business issues that get in the way to make a comprehensive measurement.
Right. And then you see a push for I want something else. I want alternatives, but then I don't know if I'm comfortable with these numbers. This is not Nielsen. I don't know what this is.
Well, they don't like it if the number is lower too. If you go to an all currency and it says that you have less viewership,
the methodology sucks. Yeah. I want to ask you about you've written something else you've written about. It's been a big topic, somewhat still under the radar because of all the hype around generative AI, but this advancement in AI-driven media buying / optimization, which is being pushed by Meta and Google, and to a large extent. So a two-part question is, are brands feeling okay with this, putting that media buying stuff in the hands of automated tools that they can't control? How's that going? And then when are we going to see this in television if we do?
Well, so brands already do put a lot of their money in automated systems they can't control. They've been doing that with all types of programmatic advertising for years. But the use of AI isn't necessarily new. That's been slapped on all sorts of products. Like 8 years ago, Rocket Fuel, a DSP that doesn't exist anymore because it was absorbed into Seismic, which blew up. They touted their advanced AI capabilities at that time, and so did many others, and that didn't save them. And so you're going to see AI slapped on a lot of things that already existed. I mean, God, just Google search the way they're using AI. That you already had search that did basically the same thing. Yeah. It's like The Simpsons when they had the new Malibu Stacy and they just changed the accessory slightly. That's what we're doing with a lot of AI. But if it catches on elsewhere, it's going to come to TV if it hasn't already, even though those budgets are larger line items. But, if you just see how much programmatic has caught on, and by TV, I mean everything we're talking about, not linear.
Yeah.
I don't think AI is going to be used to buy network TV spots, but just given the growth in programmatic CTV buy-in, I would expect AI to come, but I don't know if that's going to make a whole lot of difference. And a lot of the things that'll be touted as AI are going to be existing products with a new name slapped on them.
So you don't think there's a difference between, I agree, you could call all of ad tech AI and to some extent a programmatic real-time bidding.
And some people do.
But with the products like Performance Max and others, that feels like a little bit more of a relinquishment of control. And you don't think that's a huge difference? Do you think it's just like marketing, or there's a fundamental shift in the way that media buying is going to work?
I view it as marketing, but in general, there has been more of a hands-off approach. Like, I mean, you've just seen increased programmatic over time. Increased basically outsourcing of your ad sales to machines. So whether they would call this AI or something else, it would just be the next step in automated ad buying, in my view. But I'm sure there's like a huge AI booster who could tell me 10 reasons why I'm wrong.
Sure. All right. I want to ask you about you, as we mentioned, you have a book coming out. Give us the title, the inspiration. Why are you doing this? And then I want to get into some of the trends you've uncovered and talked about.
Yeah, sure thing. So the book is 1999, the year low culture conquered America and kickstarted our bizarre times. Why I'm doing it is because I loved all this trashy stuff in the 90s. I loved Jerry Springer, Insane Clown Posse, pro wrestling from the Attitude Era, Beanie Babies. I liked it all. But I've noticed there's a lot of things in our culture now that kind of come from this stuff that was mocked back then. Jerry Springer is rated as the worst TV show of all time. Now our national politics basically function like a Jerry Springer talk show segment.
You make a fair point.
So there's a lot of the most derided aspects of 90s culture are visible all around us all the time. And so I wanted to intellectualize that and put it in a place where I could put it out. And I guess I've just been inspired by the nuttiness of our world over the last 5 years.
You definitely have, all of a sudden, there's a documentary boom, at least. There's an overall documentary boom in streaming, but a lot of 90s themed. You mentioned there's a new Jerry Springer doc out on Netflix. You had a big WWE one that, I mean, it wasn't just about the 90s, but covered that period a lot. Menendez brothers, other things.
Beanie Babies was on Max a year or two ago. Yeah.
Is this just happening because it's been enough time has passed and it's the period, while we were just nostalgic about the 80s a few years ago, now it's 90s, or is there something that's connecting us to that time more, or of more interest to Gen Z or something?
So I would say the young Gen Xers and millennials are starting to come of the age where the pop culture, their youth, is what they want to revisit, and that's like what brings them happiness. So all that stuff is getting rebooted. The same thing happened with 50s pop culture in the mid 70s and early 80s
and all that stuff.
Happy Days, Grease, Back to the Future in the 80s. So if you take stuff from the 50s and you go forward 25 years later, that's what you get. So we're 25 years from the late 90s right now. And so the late 90s are what's fashionable because the people who are in charge of media companies and institutions are of that age now.
What struck me, this is a little bit of I watched the WWE Mr. McMahon documentary, for example, and we tend to think that culture and taste has it's always worse now. Things used to be, like a lot more civilized, and we're degrading because of social or because of whatever. And I was struck by how that attitude era you talked about at WWE was it was racy and pushed the envelope, and that was on regular television.
It was awesome.
And I was older than I was more of an 80s wrestling fan. But I guess do we not realize how rough the culture was at times back then, and maybe we sanitize it, and what has that done to us today, where we are in media and taste? And
the time you're living in is always perceived as the worst time as far as moral standards. There's always some sort of moral reformer who says that today's youth are the worst, and their form of entertainment is the one that needs to be put down. In the 90s, it was video games need to be censored, and before that you got rock and roll and radio, and
now
all the way
TikTok
down
is garbage, right?
Yeah, exactly. TikTok is the new video games of the 90s. So someone. I was talking about the book recently with another host, and they kind of put forth the same question to me. And what I said was that if you go back and read all the news articles and books that were coming out at the time from the 90s, which I had to do for this research, it didn't seem like this peaceful time where everything was great. The internet at the time provoked probably more anxiety than it does now.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at all the hearings for the 1996 Telecommunications Act and then what became of Section 230, the debates were fierce, and there was just this fear that kids would consume anything on the internet and it'd turn them into these depraved sociopaths.
You're going to go into a chat room and get killed. And it was just like,
yeah. So the culture then was seen as being trashy because Jerry Springer was on top and pro wrestling was on top, and the internet offered all these things that the people who were writing about it didn't understand. So they didn't see it as like innocent days. We just see it as innocent days now. If we go forward 25 years, I think people our age now are going to say, wow, they were scared of TikTok. That's crazy. And AI was so like it was so in its early stage, they were blown away by like these image generators, like
right.
And they wanted to have regulation on them. What's the perception of innocence versus harm changes a lot over time, and we tend to look at the past with more rose-colored glasses than the people who were writing about and covering the era at the time did.
What anything really surprised you when you went back and were doing research for the book?
Yeah, there's two things. So one was how much Beanie Babies contribute to the success of eBay. So when eBay had its IPO in '98, their S1 talks about the Beanie Baby resale market and how like that's a potential volatility to their business because it was over 10% of their revenues at the time.
See, I remember when the eBay, the promise was you'd be able to buy this lamp that someone's throwing out. It was not cool. But there was already a sophisticated reseller market for Beanie Babies, which is wild.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, I was aware of like the moral panic that happened after the Columbine shooting, where all sorts of mass entertainment, from the Matrix movies to Marilyn Manson albums to the Doom video games, were blamed for the tragedy, and there were attempts to censor them. I wasn't aware that there was an academic cottage industry that started. Within the 5 years after '99, which is when Columbine happened, the share of academic articles devoted to linking violent video games to real world violence increased dramatically. Like we're talking, 5x in the period of just a few years. And that link wasn't as studied as much, and the conclusions drawn from it weren't as politicized as the way they were afterwards, because we think of academia, they're impartial, they're these high-minded people who just put results above agenda, but that's not really the case. They're as prone to the same whims that the press is, or that emotional individuals are, and that wasn't something that was as clear to me before I started researching it.
And what happened there? Like, why didn't? Because you fast forward to today, and young kids are playing Fortnite, which is basically a game where you
that's a shooter,
kill everybody to survive, and we got over that to a certain extent. Did that just not take hold, or we just like culture shifted again back and forth?
Well, there's always a new panic. So once we don't freak out over comic books. And in the 50s, there were congressional hearings to try to censor comic books. That seems crazy today.
Now that's every movie is a comic book movie. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And the calls to ban radio, radio was blamed for all these illnesses back in the 30s. Doctors would even write these op-eds to the New York Times about the ills of radio, because audio entertainment didn't foster the same type of learning capabilities that reading did for any of those who are listening to this. But what's happened is that games matured. So the audience went from being young to being old. The average gamer is now in their mid-30s. Back in the 90s, it was in their early 20s because it was a hobbyist pursuit. Once you had PlayStation 1, you had the first console to go over 100 million. It's now the most mainstream entertainment that there is. Like, it's just big intellectual property, like Mario
way bigger
and
than
Sonic.
The movie business, even though we don't talk about it in the same way.
Yeah, bigger than movies and music and books combined. Video game revenues exceed them all. So now that the people who grew up with games are adults, the panic goes to the next thing. So video games do get blamed in some quarters, but they don't take the heat that they did in the 90s. TikTok takes that heat right now.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be, we're days away from a decision there, and whether that's going to be saved or not, but there'll be something else like it that'll come along, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, in 20 years, what TikTok and AI, that's another thing that people panic over. Those will be normalized, and there'll be a new form of technology communication that is used primarily by young people. That's going to provoke a lot of anxiety, and that will be the panic of that era.
All right, one last thing. Bringing it back to just 2025, you've been writing a lot about predictions about the ad business. Are there a couple of things you're really looking forward to that would be bellwethers of where the market's going, or things that you want to talk about that are big issues we should focus on?
So Netflix has done a lot of experimentation with sports. Like, they have 2 NFL games here, they have a fight here, they have a golf tournament here. Raw, WWE Raw is their first like really recurring sports like live
and that is live weekly, correct?
Live weekly, yes. I'm expecting, I don't know if it's going to be this year, at some point Netflix is going to dip their toes in the water and get a big sports right contract. Like, like something like what Amazon's done, for instance.
Right.
Most of the big leagues in the US have their rights locked up.
Yeah, the NBA just made their big deal, right?
Yeah, and NFL isn't due for a while, and MLB's even after that. But you have individual college conferences, you have international sports. They are going to get a bigger live sports package, and that's going to change how sports rights get bidden on. So, the value they bring won't just be the revenue that they're paying for the rights. The sports leagues are going to start looking at how do we expand among young viewers who aren't watching sports at the same rate as older viewers. We don't want to lose, Gen Z.
And they're on Netflix all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So you saw that with the NBA. Like the NBA preferred Amazon clearly over Warner. The matching wasn't just about the dollar amount. It was like about the promotion that Amazon could give it and the rest of its portfolio and getting younger, modern, being streaming. Exactly. So Netflix is a lot bigger than Prime Video, especially in terms of watch time. So when Netflix finally does make a big splash into sports, that's like, it's done for linear TV. Their upper hand is, there'll still be a lot of sports on linear TV, but their upper hand of being the top party that you go to in those negotiations will wither. And so that's what I'm looking at, and I expect to happen within the next year.
I'll be interested on that note to see. I know YouTube has NFL Sunday Ticket, but I was actually surprised they didn't get on the NBA rights, because they could theoretically have the same kind of impact if they got a big sports rights deal to push it out to that huge audience. I'm watching them quietly as well.
Yeah, they could, maybe even more so. YouTube is really, really huge all around the world. They're, it's like with Sunday Ticket, they have different packages you can get, like whether you're with YouTube TV or not, but you kind of are paying a la carte, which is a little different than, like Netflix just rolls Raw right into your existing subscription.
Yeah, it's on the menu.
Thursday Night Football is on the homepage when you log in.
Right.
So if YouTube did that and put it for free, oh my God, the viewership would be crazy.
Game changer.
It'd be hard to make that revenue back in advertising alone, though, because you'd have to pay such an astronomical amount to get those games exclusive.
All right, Ross, great stuff. Thanks for taking time out. Where should people find the book? Amazon, I'm assuming.
You could go there. Go to bookshop.org or straight to the publisher's website, University Press of Kansas. Bezos doesn't need any more money.
Yeah, he's doing all right. All right, well, great conversation. Let's do this again. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike.